Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The previous session by Nitin Chanjalia from Boston Consulting Group was very much informative and insightful in this new normal scenario. So now let's move on to another interesting panel discussion among the CEOs of South Asian media companies on the way forward for digital revenue and their strategic focus for the year 2022. For this, now I would like to invite Mr. Mukund Padmanabhan to chair this panel discussion. A short introduction about Mr. Mukund Padmanabhan. Mr. Padmanabhan was the editor of The Hindu from 2016 to 2019. Previously, he was the editor of The Hindu business line, The Hindu's business paper. Mukund is also an MPhil in philosophy and worked briefly as a lecturer in University of Delhi before switching on to journalism. He is interested in and has written about politics, legal affairs, and literature. Before joining the Hindu group in 1997, he had worked with the Sunday Magazine in Kolkata and the Indian Express in Chennai. Welcome, Mr. Mukund Padmanabhan, to our session. I kindly request you to take over the session and invite all the other panelists to the session. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And welcome to Ritu and Srinivasan, or Srini, as I know him for a very long time. Ritu, as you know, is the co-founder of Quint. She used to head programming at the History Channel and was featured editor of CNN IBN, where she launched the popular Citizen journalist show, among others. Srini, if I may call you Srini, is the managing director of the Vikatan Group, which is almost 100 years old now. It's in its 90s. He's a third generation entrepreneur. And people who live in Chennai, like myself, know him as someone who's actually done a great deal of work in not only in diversifying the group, but particularly in the digital space. So I think we'll be looking forward to hearing from both of them. I think we have one panelist who couldn't make it, Mr. Arijit Chatterjee. I'm not sure whether he's going to be able to join us, as it goes on. We leave that open, and we hope we can. So let me start by saying the original title of the program I received contained the expression silver bullet. I mean, in fact, it asked whether there was a silver bullet for sustainability and revenue. I doubt whether there's any such thing at all. But if there is a silver bullet, Srini, and this is to you, surely it's subscription. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Mukund, you're a very old hand at this, so I'm not even going to start. But the editors have often been the kings of this universe, and the publishers have supposedly been the gatekeepers. But today, I mean, this is something which I found. We went into subscription about 17 years ago, and on digital, and I think it took me forever to convince my editors and my publishers that, listen, unless you put the reader or the user in the middle of anything, it's never going to work. Unfortunately, there are two sides to every coin. So like the famous saying goes, the user of the product or the reader doesn't necessarily know what he or she wants. It has always been the bastion of the editors to say what needs to be said. But how do you balance between what needs to be said and what is chosen to be listened to, heard, seen, or read? I think that's an eternal question. I don't think anybody has answers to that. But the closer we get there to answers, I'm sure subscriptions will be that silver bullet that will take us from where we are to the next century.
Yeah. So I was reading this Reuters survey that was conducted this year, and it asked a question of 246 CEOs, and these were people worldwide. And they asked this question: which of the digital streams is going to be important or very important to your company in 2022? And 79% flagged subscription. And Ritu, I know that lot of your offerings are free. One of them is behind paywall of sorts. So do you agree that this is possibly the only way forward in the long run if you're going to be sustainable?
I think that's the only way, that is the most critical way forward. I'm not sure whether there will be a time when we will be not dependent at all on ad revenue. But I think it's so important because it's also important towards the quality of journalism. Because, when the problem with being ad revenue dependent is that it puts the currency of traffic over the currency of credibility or quality of journalism, whereas reader revenue necessarily is contributing or coming to you or paying for certain quality of journalism. So one's prayer and hope is that the future will turn to when people will start paying in a significant way towards paying for news.
Yeah, I'm going to discuss the specific issues about what this kind of free digitization does to journalism, which you flagged as, I think, a vital question, which is probably not asked as much as often and integrated as closely in fora like these. But again, just to quote from another survey, and I don't know how accurate surveys are, but there was another survey conducted by the World Economic Forum which suggested that Indians and Chinese, as a proportion of consumers today, which is not a very large proportion, but still, they pay more and are likely to pay more in the future for news than they say their counterparts in the US and the UK. And there are nascent green shoots. I was talking to some, I think in my own newspaper house, subscription revenue now is a little over 50% of the overall digital revenue, which is still small. But there seems to be a willingness, or at least, there seems to be some ground for hope, exactly the kind of hope that you express. So Srini, is this much too optimistic? Are we looking at many, many years in the future? Or do you think 3 or 4 years from now we'll be speaking a slightly more hopeful language?
Frankly, I don't know the quality of this survey that you're talking about, because the prices in the West are far, far away as compared to the pricing that we come up with. So yesterday I was having a word with Pradeep and Pradeep Vairala of the Hindu, and we were kind of exchanging notes about subscriptions. And we came to a decision that this monthly subscription doesn't make sense in India, because the quantum of an annual subscription package itself is not so overwhelming. So you might as well go for the annual package as the typical package. In the US, typically what we pay in India per month is what we pay in India per year is what the new subscriber pays for a month. So I think there's a yawning gap between. I really don't know where this subscription stuff comes from, because if you see Netflix, they had to bring down their prices substantially in India, and that too hasn't really helped them. So the Indian pricing scenario conundrum is a completely different ballgame. Having said that, it's in a way it's good because it's kind of democratization of news, and it's not something that subscription is only meant for the elite. So when subscription prices, so today an OTT platform comes and says 1 rupee a day, you can watch, all the movies, or you can watch all the stuff. So maybe we need to be moving towards a rupee a day, which is something that Money Control does very well, right? If in fact they do it even less than that. So maybe we should be moving towards the bottom end of the pyramid rather than trying to, chase an elite set of people who most of us are currently chasing. So we should be changing the nature of the game, but I don't think we are quite there yet. When you look at the New York Times almost touching 10 million subscriptions online, and when you compare that with all of the subscriptions in India that have come in online, I don't think we are anywhere close to even that number. So, there is a kind of difference.
Yes, there is a gulf. But the other thing we notice, at least in India now, and I'm not sure whether you can generalize from this, but there seems to be we seem to be in a place where niche players are doing better, or sometimes, not doing too badly. I mean, Money Control is a great example. Announced they had 5 lakh paid subscribers, which is quite astonishing for a sort of a site that basically deals with the financial markets. We know that niche players, small niche players, Ken is just one example, does long form in a sort of limited sort of way. It's not as if they're engaged in general news or anything. And they've been in the black for a few years, or at least they say they've been in the black for a few years. Whereas they're much, much bigger digital natives that are doing general news, which are still probably not breaking even. So Ritu, do you think this is a space? And I think we were talking about this the other day. I mean, the New York Times cooking app is a good example. I mean, it was making money some years ago when, the main New York Times app was, not doing quite so well. So is there a sort of, at least in the short run, do you see a sort of bias in favor of niche products? And is this the possible way to go?
I'd say utility over niche.
Okay.
I think Money Control and in our case Bloomberg Quint and even Ken to quite some extent, I think people are paying for information you can use. I don't know if you can say the same thing for other kinds of niche. And similarly, the broad, to the point that you raised, the broad general news sites, even somebody as big and successful in subscription as NYT, they all need their subscription hooks. So if it's cooking for NYT, it may be, closer home, it may be more Bollywood content for somebody, it may be, music for somebody else, it may be crosswords. So the challenge is that you've got to have something to draw people in. Many years ago, John Appariti of BuzzFeed, he had talked about the right-hand side and the left-hand side, on the desktop, where you need to get the audiences in through the lighter content of the right-hand side and get them to consume the sort of core news and political and current affairs content on the left-hand side. And that seems to have, that draw for the audiences seems to have, continued into the subscription space. But I completely agree with Srini that it has to be, we all have to start thinking audience first. Even in our, we have a very sort of nascent membership. It's nothing is behind a paywall, but we ask people to come and support our kind of journalism. And early data, looking at data clearly shows that the conversions are not happening from our deep dive investigations or our documentaries or field reporting. It's coming more from some of the stories on, updates on jobs and, or education related stories. So, and then they're converting and then they're engaging with us on, our core content. So there is this trying to figure out the user journey and the funnel. That's one. I think the other really critical thing when it comes to cracking your reader revenue, apart from being audience first and everything that you're thinking, is really cracking the technology. I know how much of a difference it's made to Bloomberg Quint when they've had, significant technology brought into their reader revenue, because then the kind of offerings and the kind of reader servicing that you can do, this sort of goes up many notches, because otherwise, one bad experience and the reader bounces off, because there is so much free information for them to rely on. And of course, that brings us to, the whole debate on distribution through these large tech platforms and revenue.
Yeah, you talked of your core offering, and you talked about people coming in from elsewhere and so on. And we still have a situation in this country where many news sites in India are heavily visited, what some people call ABCD, astrology, Bollywood, cricket, and devotion, or whatever. And since such websites, if they're free, are basically chasing traffic or trying to grab eyeballs, What is this? What does this mean? I want to ask both of you this. First, you, Ritu, and then Srini. What does this mean for journalism? Are we all being persuaded to focus on what readers really want or what drives traffic most, rather than provide a mix of content, which requires possibly to make investments in some areas that could catch much fewer eyeballs than in other areas, but nevertheless are relevant and socially important. So is this process of the print media and the traditional media dying and everything going on the digital space, is it also changing the way that we're doing journalism in a not so positive way? Ritu, you want to take that first and then Sri?
One of the conversations that's happening in the digital news space now is to look at value, increasing the value per subscriber over trying to reach for volume of subscribers. Because the minute you try and get a large volume of subscribers, then you have to get into that ABCD entrapment, so to say. So I think there's a lot of shift towards long form, deep dive, investigative, and in a country like ours where there's very few news media that's really sort of speaking truth to power and doing what news media needs to do, that if you can convince and be in a conversation with your reader and build a community of your readers on why, and be transparent with them on why you need the funds, what does it cost to get that investigative story or get that, and why that story is important. And also underline the impact that some of quality journalism has. I think that's a sort of a steeper hill to climb, but I think to preserve conversion through journalism and not through ABCD, I think I'm really on the fringe of this because we're just experimenting with this membership, and we have some members who are very deeply engaged with us. They come to us every month. We do a brainstorming session with them. We do special screenings for them of our documentaries, and it's a very deep engagement. But that volume is small. So I think to be able to constantly talk to the readers about what you're doing and why you need the reader revenue to come in. I mean, it's a bit idealistic. I don't know how far and where this will get us to, but I think you'll have to strike a balance, because otherwise, I mean, you can just, and that also will not serve a purpose beyond a point, right? Because if everyone's doing ABCD, then why should I pay for your ABCD versus the other ABCD, right? So differentiated, ultimately it's about differentiated content that somebody will come and pay for, which they will get only with Vikatan or with Hindu or with the Quint or whatever, but not get it anywhere else. Otherwise, why would I pay for it? If I can get it free on Google, why would I pay for it? So I think that ABCD should die. It should hit a plateau and then decline.
I mean, that's a nice thought. But Srini, any thoughts on this? Where is digital journalism taking us? Has it sort of lowered standards overall?
Mukund, let me follow up on the last point first. First of all, I mean, Ritu, you hit the nail on the head when you said, when Mukund was mentioning niche and you mentioned utility, I think you really hit the nail on the head. As digital publishers, I think the first thing we need to understand is that what is in it for the user, right? Especially when we're looking at subscriptions. I will clearly say that there are 1,000 niches, perhaps 1 million niches actually to be explored, right? And we have understood that our second most subscribed product within the Vikatan ecosystem is Nanayam Vikatan, which is the personal finance magazine, right? So it is all about my need to make my funds work for me when I am doing my work, right? It's all about how do I save better, how do I invest better, how do I insure myself better, and the works, right? And the third most subscribed product of ours is Pasumai Vikatan, which is all about how do I make sure that it's all about organic farming. And even though, can you imagine on the mobile, people are subscribing for Pasumai Vikatan. I don't think they are farmers. We speak to a lot of them. They are people who believe in the cause and they want to read up and they want to know and they believe that there is good information about this to get to know about, right? And they are willing to subscribe and be part of the cause. So I think you really need to find your, find the utility that the, the customer is looking for from you, by which a subscription will make sense. And this is where newspapers and magazines in general have a common issue. Typically, we always cater to the LCM. We have sports, politics, cinema, current affairs, so many things. We try to cater to as many or as much as possible, rather than actually deep dive and focus only on one vertical. So in fact, the digital media in many ways is kind of it's an antithesis of the average newspaper / magazine, general interest magazine. So that's where our niche magazines are doing better from the subscription perspective. And that kind of leads to the next question, which you talked about. Is the ABCDs, affecting, journalism at large? I think the ABCDs will always be there. There will always be one set of audiences. I mean, forget us as publishers. Look at what the daily hunts and the share chats and, the whole bunch of aggregators, see what they are doing to news. They have effectively TikTokized the entire news perspective, right? And that is garnering not just audiences, it's not just garnering reach. The biggest flow of money is happening only in that sector. We as traditional media players, we don't have access to capital the way, a Daily Hunt has, or so many of these other platforms have. It's primarily because there is always going to be a huge base of audience who is always going to be looking for the ABCD, right? But that doesn't mean that when you give out long form content. So I'll give you an example where Junior Vikatan subscription started taking an uptick after we started a series very recently on picking up one district in Tamil Nadu for a period of 4 weeks. And we started deep diving, analyzing about it. And then we said, what can be done with this district? What all is the entrepreneurial opportunities in this district, and how all you can engage with, with various liaison officers in order to improve the currency of this district and the GDP of this district. Actually, we started seeing people not just from this district, but also all across Tamil Nadu and even across the world, subscribing for Junior Vikatan and first reading this Kanava series. Yeah. Right? So when you find purpose, or rather when audience finds purpose in what you deliver, I think there is always going to be an opportunity for good journalistic editorial content to still find.
I think both of you are making similar points. At least that's at the back of what you're suggesting is that I think ABCD, while it might be around, is never going to be a hot play when it comes to subscription. And we've seen that in the past. The Sun tried to go beyond a paywall; they had to give it up. Many years ago, the Daily Mail might be Britain's biggest website, but it's still free. So you're right. There is a sense in which while digital journalism has spawned, ABCD, subscription has sort of made people look at, and as it's happened in the West, I mean, it's the more serious newspapers that have gained the most traction first. So I think there's some I want to ask one quick question before I turn it over to the audience for questions. Just briefly, I mean, we talked about what digital journalism is doing to the kind of journalism that we're doing, but we rarely ask ourselves what it's doing to journalists. I mean, are we expecting too much from journalists by asking them to have, all-round multimedia skills? This is the kind of thing that new recruits to journalism, are told time and again. And in this environment, just like in any environment which requires specialists, what happens to a journalist who isn't, has the potential to become an exceptional writer or an exceptional editor? what happens to him if he's, it's drummed into the environment that you have to be a bits and pieces guy, you have to do a bit of everything, hold a camera in your hand, take a video clip. He might be a shy, retiring person. He might write fantastic editorials when he's faceless and, when he doesn't have to interact with people. So are we going to create, are we going to take away from some of the specialist skill sets that journalists have? And Ritu, just very briefly, because I'll have to turn it over to the audience. You and then Srini again after that.
I don't think there's an either or, Mukund, because there is the importance of ground journalism. There is the importance of journalism to go out into the field and get the stories. And there are the domain expertise, the analysts, the opinion writers who are, so there is actually digital, because it's not finite by the number of sheets or the number of slots. It's ever expanding, right? So I see that there is much more opinion, deep dive writing now that we see, which is accessible to even younger readers who were earlier perhaps not reading that kind of content. So I actually think that opinion and deep dive analyst writing is finding larger audiences and younger audiences than it did. And I think on the being a multimedia commando, I think it's not just journalists who are multimedia commandos. I think it's now everybody, because devices have made it so easy to do that. I mean, we wouldn't have ever had the George Floyd story had somebody not whipped out the camera and recorded that moment of the knee on the neck. So in an environment where everybody can get you a video story, I think it's important for younger journalists who have grown up as digital natives. I think they take to it like fish like water. So I actually think that there is a lot of space for domain experts, thought experts to be writing and to be read, as well as for the multimedia commandos. So I think that's why digital is far more enriching in so many ways. Srini.
Yeah, so I think very, very briefly, I can simply give you an example of an almost close to retirement journalist of mine, who is an absolute expert at long form, and he is like, in his domain, there is nobody who can write better than him. Now, this gentleman in the last 5 years has gone from protesting the very idea that a journalist is also expected to do digital journalism or to do videos, to actually starting to tweet about the story idea, the progress, and starting to actually, direct videos and, upload them based on the story that he has written in the magazine. So I think we underestimate the power of the capacities of the people that we engage. If I practically pushed my people into it, I said 8 years back, I told them, I can simply get digital to be a separate wing, but I choose not to, because I don't want you folks to become irrelevant. I want you to be part of the team when I turn digital, and you need to lead that revolution. I think most of the journalists who are willing to take that journey with me have continued with me. And I think the new journalists automatically take to it as fish.
I have one question from the audience, and then we're supposed to wrap up. And the question is, would advertising revenue continue to be the main driver of revenue compared to digital subscription? If yes, how long would it continue before subscription revenue takes the driver's seat? Any one of you, and then we'll wind up.
Ritu, you want to go first?
I wish I had the answer to this. There's no silver bullet. I think we're going to be dependent on ad revenue for a while. I think it's going to take a while for audiences to really move.
Okay, then I'll ask you a second question, Srini. Another one, which is...
If you don't mind, I'd just like to add to that.
Yeah.
Actually, as digital publishers, we need to enhance the number of revenue streams that we have. Advertising is not the only alternate. There are alliances, there are new created businesses, there are multiple ways in which you can actually monetize your audiences and your platform and your reach. So I don't think there is a single answer. I think for us,
Affiliated marketing, NFTs, there's so many.
But I think this raises the issue of, your core purpose, and whether your core purpose is to do events and, NFTs and all the other things, e-commerce, all the other things.
I think the core purpose is to be able to get the funds to do really quality journalism.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. So last question, Srini, and this is right up your street. The question is, regional audiences will pay for journalism in the future. That's a question mark. Will they? I think you already know that. And this is asked in the context of there being a narrative that mostly paying subscribers are upper class and they move towards English content. So very briefly before we wind up.
Not at all. I have to beg to differ, because for 17 years in Tamil, we were perhaps the first in the country to have gone pay. And within 100 days, we were able to turn around our operations, and our subscription revenues still drive up substantially.
I had a feeling you would say exactly that. So, so I just want to thank you very, very much, Ritu and Srini. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Sorry this had to be short and sweet.
Thanks, Mukund.
I feel we could have gone on a few more minutes. Thank you again very much.
Thanks so much.
Let's stay in touch.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mukund Padmanabhan, Ms. Ritu Kapur, and Mr. Balasubramanian for joining us in the session. The session was very lively and very much interactive. So I hope our audience also found this very much interesting. And with this, we come to the end of this